Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Charlotte, North Carolina for a truly important day in NASCAR history. We welcome those fans watching on NASCAR.com live or listening on Sirius XM NASCAR radio. Even without our news today, of course, this week has always been one filled with great anticipation for the industry because, as we know, it's race week, so we're excited about that. And this one holds increased significance as we look forward to Saturday night's Sprint Unlimited, live on Fox. It's also NASCAR's opening weekend at Daytona International Speedway with the massive Daytona Rising project as its backdrop. Congratulations to Lisa France Kennedy, John Saunders, Joey Chitwood, and everyone at ISC on the creation of the world's first motorsports stadium. It's a phenomenal facility that several of you I know enjoyed at the Rolex 24 recently. Throughout this room, we welcome a group of executives whose tireless efforts will provide our sport with a foundation that promotes both stability and prosperity for many years to come. On stage, we welcome 7 key members of that collective group. Vice Chairman of NASCAR, Mike Helton. President of Roush Fenway Racing, Steve Newmark. Owner of Tommy Baldwin Racing, Tommy Baldwin. NASCAR Executive Vice President and Chief Racing Development Officer Steve O'Donnell, NASCAR Chief Operating Officer Brent Dewar, co-owner of Chip Ganassi Racing, Rob Kauffman, and the King, owner of Richard Petty Motorsports, Richard Petty. And now, to open with today's news, please welcome NASCAR Chairman and CEO, Brian France.
Good afternoon. Earlier today, I addressed our team owners and congratulated them on being a part of an historic day at NASCAR. And I say that because of the structural changes that you'll hear more about later regarding our team owner model. And before I walk you through just a little bit of that, let me point out a couple people. Our side tirelessly worked. This is a very complicated agreement to sort out with 60 years of history doing business in a certain way. To restructure things in the manner that we did was a very tall order to accomplish. And I will tell you that Rob Kauffman, Steve Newmark, and many others had a very steady hand in trying to figure out what, as I always start our discussions out, what is possible for the future. And where we ended up is a very good place because we believe we've made the team owner model more reliable, more stable, more open to new investors, more capital that come into the sport. And we've done that in a way that preserves a lot of the traditions that are important to NASCAR, the competition level, et cetera, how we qualify for events, the fact that if you have the talent and the aspiration to join NASCAR, you can do that in the new model as you could in the old. But in the end, we have a model that fits the 21st century and I think will serve us well into the future. And if it works properly, and we're very certain that it will, it's going to do some things. It's going to create more opportunities for as I said, for new owners to come into the sport. That's number one. Number two, it's going to have the ability to feel better and more competitive race teams. That's great for our fans. That's what they want. They want to see their favorite driver have an opportunity that's robust and competitive and all the things that makes a great race team succeed. And so all the things that we did in this new agreement all point to those important attributes of what we think makes up this new arrangement. So we're excited. We're also excited for another reason, and it's an important reason. You know, we always have said, because we mean it, that our owners and their success and their viability is very important to us. That remains true yesterday, it remains true today. But these agreements and this new course that we're on today gives us a chance to really back that up. We get to align our interests in a way we never thought we could. And I'm excited about that. We're going to be partners in a different way going forward. And I couldn't be more thrilled. There were a lot of people who thought this day might not ever come as we've looked at this particular structure through the years, through my entire career. We have never been able to sort out just how to do it to fits the NASCAR model that existed, and it would be what I say very additive into the future. But we have today, and we have through the cooperation and the hard work of a lot of people. And I want to thank everybody who worked on this very important project. And with that, I'm going to bring up Rob Kauffman.
Well, thank you very much. Just have to say, there's a fair amount of work in this process, and it was very rewarding and challenging and interesting thing to work on, and it was really an honor and a privilege to work with all the teams, the professionals and all the teams, to really help try to represent their interests and get them all focused on a common goal. And really for Brian, and in particular Brent, and everyone in Daytona for being open-minded and thoughtful about, once we had an idea of how to take something good and make it better, to really kind of embrace that and do the hard work to work through the details and get it done. So I think that's, really was a privilege to be able to work with everybody on this. I would say, though, it was a lot of work, but this is really just a foundation. This is the first step in a process now. As Brian said, we're kind of in a way, you look at, Daytona's a great track. It's always been historical, fantastic. It's a big renovation project. It's brand new and ready for the future. We kind of did the same thing with the structure of how the teams were organized in the sport with NASCAR. It's worked pretty well for a long time, but it was ready for a renovation, and we put in the elbow grease and got it done, and hopefully it'll be equally as exciting and productive for the future. The charter system that's been created, really what we were, in a way, lucky to be able to do was look at every other sport out there, right? So since it has taken 60 years to get to this point, we're able to kind of look at NFL, look at Formula One, look at soccer, look at, cricket, every kind of professional sport that's out there, and what made them successful and what problems and challenges they had, and what parts could we use and mix and match and make work for us. Also looking at the history of NASCAR and trying to figure out, okay, well, we have our own unique kind of background. I've a relative newcomer, only being involved 10 years. There's a lot of history here to figure out how to kind of square it all up and get it done. And I think we kind of focused on three key principles: participation, economics, and governance. And I think that's really the kind of foundation stones for how this new system works. But at the end of the day, and people sometimes give me a hard time, I talk about this is kind of the plumbing in the walls. It's important for this all to be right, but really for this whole venture to be successful, it's about great racing, fans being excited. It's a sport, right? And that's what we have to focus on, is growing the popularity, having a great product out there for people to enjoy. That's really the end of the day. It has to be a reasonable business, but at the end of the day, it's a sport. I think what we've done here is we've now put the teams on a more stable footing, what does that mean? I think it really allows the teams to invest for the future, right? If you think about, if you're living year to year, you can't really think about the long term. Here, what you're able to do now is say, okay, I'm going to take that risk on this young driver and see how they work out, or I'm going to spend the time to develop this crew chief or this crew member, or some of the technical sides, or even just your basic business infrastructure. So it's a step in the right direction, and I think all the work starts here. So with that, I'll leave it to Brent. So.
Super. Thank you. Thanks, Rob. As Brian mentioned, this is a landmark moment for our sport across many dimensions. And we really are at an unprecedented time in our history in terms of collaboration amongst all our industry stakeholders. And I'd really like to take the opportunity at this moment to recognize our track partners for the close cooperation that we experienced and the tireless efforts in completing the 5-year track sanction agreements, which we announced last fall. It was absolutely a key enabler to many of the elements here in the team owner agreement. I'd also like to recognize our partners from the manufacturers, Toyota, Ford, and Chevy, who have participated actively in the dialogue every step of the way to ensure further alignment of interests through our OEM Car Manufacturer Council. But really today would not have been possible without the work of a number of folks that are in the room, both from my team at NASCAR and also the NASCAR team owners, team presidents, the key executives, and many of them are in the room here with us today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for their efforts this last 18 months. and more importantly, thanks for making it happen. So I'd like to give a big applause to the team owners and my team for getting us to this point. So throughout the process, it was pretty clear from the outset that NASCAR and the team owners do have a strong alignment of shared interests. And you're going to hear this alignment of interests theme throughout the day. And the agreement really builds on that, whether that be from fostering safety, making the best racing in the world even better, to working together to drive top-line revenue, to improving operating efficiencies of our businesses, to create a long-term sustainable business model for the Sprint Cup ownership in this sport. But really, after almost 18 months of close cooperation, intense dialogue, and it was intense at times, and many late nights, and yes, the rumors are true. We did have work group meetings on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, and the countless hours of collaborating both in person and on the phone. We believe this is a landmark agreement because we're going from 1-year agreement to a defined 9-year period, which will enable us to plan and grow the sport for the next 20 years and beyond, while at the same time providing stability now to team operations and clarity to existing and potential sponsors and investors. So NASCAR is granted 36 charters, which will have the transferable rights that will provide NASCAR Sprint Cup team owners the opportunity to build long-term enterprise value. Now, the charter teams will have a guaranteed entry in the field, which will provide operating efficiency and certainty, enabling a greater alignment of interests with other key stakeholders. More defined and predictable revenue streams, which in turn provides more advanced fiscal and operational planning, as well as operating efficiencies. Greater interest in the digital operations will create even more revenue opportunities for the industry at large. Now, the NASCAR digital model has been exploding over the last couple of years, and we've shared a lot of those metrics with you. In 2015 alone, we had 1.1 billion page views, 50 million video views, and 4.1 billion social impressions. So an important element of this agreement is to align the team owner model with the growth of the digital business, from expanding whether it be racing products such as RaceView or NASCAR Drive, to creating new mobile apps, esports, gaming, virtual reality, to looking at connecting the team sites through a unified platform to both amplify and grow the digital fan base. This is just the beginning of what our imagination could possibly provide. So the charter team owners will have an increased participation also in the NASCAR governance as part of the team owner council, and a committee structure that enables a more disciplined, collaborative process that will lead to better quality decisions across the industry ecosystem. It'll be a 40-car field comprised of 36 charter teams and 4 open teams for all points races. To maintain the historical openness of the sport, non-charter race teams will be able to compete as open teams for 4 positions in the field. The charter teams will have a guaranteed entry, as I mentioned, in all points races, but all teams will compete for starting position via a qualifying format. This is a seminal moment for the sport, and we need to seize this historic opportunity to push forward in growing the sport together. Tackling competition issues, innovation, digital marketing, research and development, and improving the competitive balance through the field. So really what we're talking about today is an announcement of improving the business model between NASCAR and our team owners. We believe this new charter model will not only be good for the team owners, but it's also going to be good for our fans, our drivers, our track promoters, our manufacturers, and our sponsors by providing a strong foundation for industry growth while continuing to deliver the best-in-class racing for many years to come. So we're proud of a lot of things today, but one of the things I'm most proud of is that no one really took their eye off the ball in working behind the scenes. A lot of you are wondering, how come it's so quiet, so hush-hush? This is the business part of the model. And we didn't take our eye off the ball in what's also really most important of our core focus. And that's to have great competitive racing for our fans every week at every track. We are truly excited about the 2016 race season, not because all these tireless nights are behind us and the grueling process to get us to this point in time, but really because at the end of the day, we're all race fans. We're all racers. We're all competitors. It's what our fans expect, and it's what we expect from ourselves. I thank everybody in the media and our groups for being here today to enjoy this moment. Look forward to a great 2016 season, and the journey begins starting right now. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. A couple questions to get us started, and then we'll open it up to the media. I thought we'd start with you, Mr. Petty, and obviously you've been a member of the community for a long time and have been involved in many historical moments in this sport. Can you put into context what this means to you and your team?
Yeah, I guess NASCAR started in, 47, 48? I was like 9 years old or something like that. To me, this is the second most important thing that's ever happened in NASCAR, because now the drivers and the owners and stuff now can really work across the aisle. I was telling him a while ago, it's sort of like the Democrats and the Republicans. They've been doing their thing. We've been doing our thing and meeting in the middle a little bit. We're getting rid of that. We're going to all be in the middle of the deal now. The owners, we don't understand how NASCAR works, okay? And and they don't know how the race teams work. So now we're going to be in the same room talking about the same problems and solving the problems together. And from that standpoint, it's going to be one of the greatest things that's ever happened to NASCAR and to Cup racing. So, like I say, I've been here a long time. I've seen a lot of stuff go under the bridge, more or less. But this is the next generation of what we're going to have to do to make racing that much bigger.
Thank you, sir. So, Mr. O'Donnell, I was wondering if you could touch on a little bit about how this directly impacts the governance of the sport, and if you could perhaps give us some insight in terms of moving forward, including what we'll see ahead of us in Daytona Speed Weeks.
Yeah, I think I'd echo some of what the King said, certainly not from his experience, but really bringing the two groups together in a much more formal way, and what that's going to allow us to do. If you look at this sport, we've got the best people in the world in racing, and being able to utilize those folks across as many decisions as possible only benefits the fans. And the key part of this will be longer runways, working together, and not just working on things that may affect us next week at Daytona, which we certainly have conversations about, but where are we going for 2020 and 2021, and how can we impact the fans and really grow the sport? So I'm personally excited about it. I think it's a tremendous opportunity for the sport and to grow the fan base, and certainly as it affects Daytona, a lot of dialogue has taken place for Speed Weeks. We will roll that out at the end of this week in terms of qualifying and some different things that the new charter system takes into effect. So I'd ask you to give us a couple days to put the finishing touches on that, but that'll be coming here by Thursday.
Thanks, Steve. Tommy, you've seen the sport from a lot of different capacities. What does owning a charter mean for Tommy Baldwin Racing?
I guess Rob and Brent touched on a little bit. It's the stability. It allows us now to just look so far ahead to be able to build our business, the brand. That's the key for us. It's like everyone's touched on. It's been a journey, and I know Richard said 1947 or 8, he was 8 or 9. Well, I was, I think, 6 or 7 years old watching him at Islip Speedway in Long Island race, and to be up on this stage together and seeing what we've accomplished is pretty cool.
Steve, you played a significant role, as been acknowledged by Brent and others, in this process. Can you give us a little bit of a sense of how that went about and your perspective on it overall?
Sure. Undoubtedly, the most notable aspect of this entire process for me was just to observe the unprecedented level of collaboration and cooperation among all the parties involved, whether it's team owners, team execs, drivers, tracks, and everyone at NASCAR. And I think you hear a lot of that here, although it's not surprising that there were lots of different opinions, lots of different perspectives expressed during the process, and you expect that with a diversity in our sport that we have. There was always an unwavering commitment to a single goal, a single mission, and that was to make our sport better and stronger for our fans and our partners. And then that commitment translated into a willingness of everyone involved to pursue and explore a complete paradigm shift in how we operate and to create a much stronger and more stable foundation going forward. And I think if you poll everyone who's been involved in this process, the prevailing sentiment would be that the kind of collaborative precedent that we set during this process bodes very well for our future.
Thank you, Steve. Mike, how ultimately do you see this impacting our fans and what they'll see on the racetrack each and every week?
Yeah, it's a huge positive, and I think today's announcement serves as a testimony to the alignment of our industry's interest in doing what's good for the future of NASCAR. And when that's translated to what happens at the racetrack, I think fans understand very clearly that second only to safety is NASCAR and the garage area's interest in making the races entertaining and exciting. And I think today's announcement speaks loudly to that, because we know that race car drivers want good, fast race cars. And with today's announcement and the team owners being able to predict their business models, to build on their business models, to be excited about being in the sport, then we know the quality of that race car is going to get better, and the racing quality grows with it.
Thank you, Mike. Now it's time to open it up to the media. Please raise your hand and identify who you are when you ask the question and who you want to direct the question to, if there's a group as well. Steph Ackerman and Laura Finley from the IMC team will be here. We'll start with Tom Jensen, and then we'll go to Claire B. Lang, and then over to Jeff Glock.
Hi, I guess this would be for Steve or Mike. Tom Jensen, FoxSports.com. These charters are going to be able to be sold between teams. When they change hands, when a charter is sold, will you guys announce it publicly, and will the economics of the transaction be disclosed at all?
Yeah, I think it will. We'll be transparent across it in terms of the ownership, so that rest assured that the media will know going into Daytona or for whatever race that may be of who is the owner of that particular vehicle.
We kind of thought that some transparency around this would be good. I mean, you don't really, the money is not the most interesting thing, I think, from a fan standpoint, but I think it's important to acknowledge that if there's value growing in these things or how it's going, it's something quite interesting. So we have a mechanism in place to have some transparency system. So as they start to transact, there'll probably be a bit of a lag, but you'll see, okay, well, this is what happened to this one, and here's who bought it, and there'll be some bit of a tail of the tape on it, so to speak.
Claire B. Lang, Sirius XM NASCAR Radio. Brian, what would your father or grandfather have thought of this agreement, and where do you think it stands in the history of things that have been done in NASCAR comparable to anything? And what was the toughest part of making it happen?
Well, I think changing a structure is the hardest thing, and to balance everybody's interest, and that includes the tracks, that includes people who've made bets on us in different ways, television partners, and so on. Did it work, for them? And I think your first question, how my father would have thought about it, he would have obviously been conservative about this, and that's a nice way to say that. But on the other hand, I will say he always, and I know this from my own career, I always brought him things through the years, whether it was consolidating our TV rights way back in the day or whatever it was. And he was, or the chase, another good example, where you would have thought he wouldn't have been in favor of it, but he always had enough confidence in me at the time and enough, flexibility to know that he didn't have all the answers. So I'll bet he would have, once he saw all the things unfold, because by the way, this is not a new idea that has been proposed to us recently. This has been an idea that was on the table in various forms for a long time. And so we've never been able to sort it out. I bet if he saw what I saw by some very talented people on this stage and out, on both sides of the aisle, that said, well, wait a minute, if we thought about it this way, I bet he would have probably, he would have gotten on board. That would be my prediction.
Okay, we'll go to Jeff, to Lee, and then over to Dustin.
Jeff Clark from USA Today. I think maybe Steve might be the best one to answer this, but there was a mention of that the governance of the sport would now involve the owners in some way. What specifically will the owners be involved? I mean, are we talking like rule changes at every level that owners will have input on now, or how will that work?
Hell no. Yeah, no, I think,
Hell no.
yeah. I think it's important to make a bit of a distinction. In all of these discussions, the owners were very clear that we need a sanctioning body. We still need, someone to run the races, and I think the cooperation across the aisle was tremendous through all that. What governance really means, Jeff, is looking at a lot of these long-term decisions that have a big financial impact potentially on teams, and also a big impact on what the race product will look like. Historically, we had some one-off discussions, but this gives us really a formal process to talk about where do we want to be in the next few years, how do we get there, what's the right timing to do that, and collecting all that input and making a decision that we all believe is going to drive the sport forward. And I think it really formalizes that. It's something that we've needed, candidly, and I look forward to, and I think, looking at a lot of the experts out there in the industry will help us make even better and more informed decisions as we go on.
Anyone else want to touch on that from team council perspective? Okay. We'll go to Lee, and then Dustin, and then Bob Pockruss.
Lee Spencer, Motorsport.com. Just wondering if you have the details as far as how the transferring of a charter would go, whether it's a lease, whether it's a sale. And there was some talk as far as performance, detailing how and where people would stand as far as their charters or go, where you would have to be in points or point standings, so to speak, to maintain a charter over a long period of time.
Do you want to take that, Brent?
Yeah, so multi-level question there, Lee, but 36 charters, and so the first question of transfer, it can be a permanent transfer. You can transfer in at sale. That was part we talked about, the ability to create that aggregate value, and so you could sell. We also have a short-term transfer provision, so the charter could be transferred one time during the first 5 years, and per race car, and it would have to be for the full season. Steve, you want to jump on?
I think that's fair. I think one of the objectives that we had as part of this process from the team side and trying to create some long-term enterprise value is to implement transferability rules that more resemble what you see in other sports. And the objectives of that would be to both provide more incentive for the owners to invest, but also to make it more appealing for outside and new owners to come in. And so that's really how you see the structure when it's memorialized in the agreement, and that NASCAR does have oversight over the transfer process. But ultimately, this should hopefully facilitate a better market for team charters going forwards.
And then, Lee, to your last part of the question, to acquire a charter, you're going to have to acquire through the existing 36 charters.
But is there a performance-based incentive there that people will maintain their charters through that? Because what was missing in this list of teams that have been, I guess, grandfathered in or have already secured a charter for this top 36, how would somebody like the Wood brothers get in going forward into the program? So
first part of the performance, there is a performance requirement for all of the existing charter members to maintain that in good standing, and it's understood in the agreement. Our goal is not to be taking charters away, but they're going to continue to race and perform and to drive better performance. So there'll be a notification process for them to maintain that good standing. To a current open team, there's not a way to race your way into a charter. There is an ability to be an open team and to race for race purse and to compete as an open team. And we think that's important for the historical reference of the sport, to allow people. This is a lot of historical and institutional knowledge to become a race car and a race team owner. And so we think that having that avenue to be an open team is obviously a precursor opportunity for those that choose to go in that direction to become a charter team owner in the future.
We'll go to Dustin and then over to Bob.
Dustin Long, NBC Sports. Question for Brent and one for Rob. Brent, can you talk about kind of how the revenue will be distributed? I know that the owners, I think you mentioned just that, now the owners kind of can plan their budgets a little bit better, knowing kind of certain amount of money they're going to hit or be eligible for, how that kind of works in race purses and things moving forward. And Rob, because you were talking about transparency earlier, can you, I guess, provide in your words the tale of the tape of your charters, where they're going, and I guess what you got for them and so forth. Transparency.
Sure. Yeah, so I think the first thing is was to have more simplicity and clarity of what we affectionately call the pool money. So and we have a lot of good reasons for our historical way we did things. And so it'll be basically 4 different areas that we would look at. One would be race purse, that both the charter teams and the open teams will compete for. One is going to be historical performance, and so looking at the competitiveness of the race teams to really drive to better perform over those last 3-year averages. One will be historical, one will be fixed purse performance, which is the guaranteed entry, and one will be, the 4th bucket will be year-end point fund. So taking a lot of the historical elements and looking at trying to provide the stability elements and also the competitive elements is the balance that we looked at to achieve that.
Yeah, so I think on one of my favorite topics, the money part, it doesn't really change, night into day. I think the economics of the sport are basically the economics of the sport. I think the primary, there's growth and indexation in the contractual revenue, and there's opportunities in new revenue to grow in the digital space, for example. So that's really where we hope the money will go in a positive direction. How it's distributed is basically relatively similar. I think the big difference is, you can think of it almost like a building. Instead of having a 1-year lease, now you have a 9-year lease. You have that income for 9 whole years, so you can plan a bit better. So that's the big thing relative to certainty as opposed to quantity. In terms of the transferring of charters, we actually made a form. It's attached to the contract, and you fill it out and submit it to NASCAR, and they hopefully approve it, and then it's on file. From a transparency standpoint, that'll be available to other charter owners to see what the transaction were, and it's disclosable. I think it'll be ultimately up to the parties in the transaction itself to say, do they just want to actually make it public or not? I think maybe given the interest and newness of it, we'd probably try to look at that, but I think that'll be each individual transfer. We'll have to figure that out with themselves. But I think as it relates to the 2 charters that MWR is going to get, a basic tenet of this is use it or lose it, right? So if you don't race, you're not going to have it. So for those two slots to be available, those will have to be transferred before Daytona. I think it's very likely the JGR and Stewart House will probably be acquiring those in the not too distant future. Step 1 was to get them to exist, which took us a little work through Friday night, and now that they exist, we can work on moving them around.
Question from Bob Pockris.
Bob Pockris,
over here next to him.
ESPN. One for Steve and a couple for Brent. Steve, will the point system structure change at all, or is it still 43 plus bonus for a win? Considering now that there are 40 cars, will it go down to 40 plus bonus for a win? And then for Brent, can you give us any more? Obviously, Rob just said that you're going to have to start, but does the team have to be a certain spot in points to keep the charter? And then also, how do you guarantee revenues through the point fund when you're looking for a new series sponsor, so you really don't know exactly how much the point fund would be?
Yeah, on the first one, Bob, again, that'll come out probably in a more formal fashion Thursday, but we do plan on looking at the point system and matching that across all 3 of our national series. Now with a field of 40, it does seem to make more sense to go 1 through 40, so that is what we're looking at. Still a few steps to take to communicate and work with the industry to do that, but that is the plan.
Yeah, Bob, obviously, as we said, the focus today wasn't on the economics, but there were obviously key economic elements in this, and there's certain certainty we have over the 9-year period, and there's certain elements that are uncertain during the 9-year period, and so we as a group understand that, and where the flexibility be on those points, those elements that we go forward on the economics. So we've got work to do on, you can kind of get the idea, we've got a 5-year track agreement, and we're looking at a 9-year agreement here. So there's different stages of the various elements of the stakeholders, and that'll also be true for key entitlement sponsors. Yeah. So the question is, the teams understand what their requirements are going to be to maintain the charter from a performance standpoint, and the onus is in their hands to do that. And so we feel very confident that this is not about taking charters away, Bob. It's not about so where they rank on the various levels throughout the season. At the end of the season, we'll have a notification process very similar to how other similar sports structures work.
We'll go here and then over to Caitlin.
Tucker White, SpeedwayMedia.com. This is for Steve O'Donnell. With the is there a chance maybe sometime down the future where we could see a system where where the lowest charter team in the points could lose that charter to the highest non-charter team in the points, like i.e. a type of relegation system you would see in European soccer leagues?
I think if you go back to what Rob talked about earlier, we did study a lot of different sports, including the EPL, and for us, the best model is where we've landed. And I'd echo what Brent said is, our goal is to have sustainable charters, and we're comfortable with the number that we have, and believe that the number 36 in terms of charters are. But we don't want to be in the business of taking any away. We want to see them go out and compete, and 1 through 36 have that opportunity to go win a championship.
I want to be clear, when we studied the sports, you studied cricket. I couldn't even understand cricket, but we did look at cricket.
I don't understand how they play it. I understand how the
business model. It's some interesting time over the last 18 months.
Caitlin Vincey with Fox Sports for Brent. In the event that qualifying is rained out, how will you all determine those last 4 spots?
That's a great question, but I'm going to refer that to Steve O'Donnell.
Yeah,
I'd like to know that.
We'll communicate that on Thursday, but I think we met with the owners today, and there's an understanding very similar to how we've always operated in terms of qualifying, and if there's a rain-out plan, there'll be a plan in place, but I think everyone's comfortable that we've got plans in place for not only qualifying or the duels, but we fully expect to be qualifying on Sunday in the sunshine, hopefully.
Okay, we'll take 3 final questions. We'll start over with Nate.
Nate Ryan, NBC Sports. I realize this is probably somewhat set by market value, but does NASCAR have an expectation of what they want charters to cost when transferred? And would Rob have any insight on this, considering it sounds like you're transferring 2 of your charters to another team?
No, we won't. And obviously we've studied the relative values and, in all sports leagues of what they trade at, and we have some idea of over time. But remember, and it's been said a couple of times, this is not from one moment to the next that we achieve all of our goals about what a charter will be worth over time. So the first was getting the structure. And let me say one other thing that is very important, that, starting with me, and I told our group, we meet every year in December, last week rather, we meet every year with our senior management team, and I told them this is going to change things all for the better, because we are now aligned with our team owners. We have to make them successful. It's not enough to say, well, I hope their business model works out. I hope that we get the rules packages right, that doesn't affect their cost in a negative way. I hope that they participate fairly with us over here. Those are all fine things to strive for. We have to make them all happen. And the track operators, who have been great, starting with their 5-year agreements to help us do that, all realize that, because these are going to be publicly, or not public, they're going to be traded. They're going to be, we want to be more attractive for other investors to come in to the sport. That means, very simply, that we got to make the business model work better than it works today, and improve on it every year.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I say, we try to strike a balance, right? Because this is kind of new. The fact is, the economics that comes from, the TV package, the NASCAR, the overall part of that is probably on average between 20 and 40% of the budget. The average is around 25% of the budget to really run a competitive car year in and year out. So I think in the leagues where you see these telephone number transactions, there's much bigger economics, relatively speaking. I think we're trying hard, and this is certainly a significant sport and growing, but I think it's just measure-wise quite a bit different. As it relates to the values over time, I think if you're trying to grow the value and you don't have any way of tracking it, that makes it pretty hard to figure out, right? So sort of like trying to see what's real estate in a neighborhood worth. So we try to put a system in place that kind of balances some level of discretion and privacy of a financial transaction between parties, and have it out there in the public when it's appropriate. So as I said earlier, you'll see the transactions happen probably with some kind of lag after the appropriate paperwork's filed and they're actually transferred, et cetera. Most of that activity will happen in the beginning of the season because you need to run it for the full season. So between now and Daytona, you'll probably see whatever transactions are going to occur are going to probably happen between now and Daytona 500, probably somewhere running up into that week. It'll be more obvious where they are. If you ask me right now, what do I think they're roughly worth? I would say single-digit millions individually. Low or high, it's kind of hard to pin on it, but I'd say that's probably not a bad guess. So we'll see.
We'll go with Kenny Bruce and then over to Jenna Fryer.
Kenny Bruce with NASCAR.com. For Brian, a couple of quick things. First of all, how did you all arrive at the 9-year length for this deal? And also, I'm guessing if it hadn't been completed in time for the start of this season, that would have caused a tremendous amount of headaches, because if you put it off for a year, then it kind of affects a lot of the things that you had in the criteria.
Yes, and listen, when we say, a 9-year agreement, we are striving, this is the model that we're going to be building into long into the future after 9. 9 years was a function of the foreseeable revenue model that television being one, and other related things that we could quantify. And so we couldn't speak for things that we didn't have any view on past that. But what our hope is that this model works so well, and we're very confident, frankly, that it will. That that as long as our agreements, whatever they are, the major agreements, they'll always be running concurrently or with those agreements long in the future, well after 9 years. And you're right on the timing. We were running out of time when the season starts. That would have been it. We would have, and you never know. This is a very, very complicated thing. If we would have had to table it, pick it back up in the fall, I don't know if the momentum, who knows, but it doesn't matter. We got, everybody's talking about, I'm opening up Christmas gifts with my kids on Christmas Eve, and my phone's blowing up. So, I knew it was,
Sorry about
we all
that.
felt. We all felt.
Jenna?
Jennifer, AP. This is 3 kind of housekeeping things. How many charters can a team own? How many can anybody come in off the street and get a charter, or does NASCAR have approval of that? And does NASCAR get a cut of the transfer sale price?
Who's answering that one? Me? Okay. First one is 4 is the maximum, sort of like the system works now, right? 4-car limits. Part B was, can anyone buy one? I think there's some criteria about goods. I think we're on tapes, so I can't make any bad jokes. But anyway, there's some provision for people in good standing and reputable and the like and wherewithal. But it's a fairly open process because we're trying to expand the base of people who are interested. And then
we don't get a cut. We have an administrative fee.
Yeah.
Just for processing.
No, but do you have approval of who?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
You can buy mine for $100 million, Jenna.
We haven't informed.
I don't know if I don't know if we'd approve that.
I'm not sure the check would clear, but
Jenna, I didn't say that. I'm happy if you came right into the ownership family.
All right.
How's we doing?
Wrap it up with the gentleman in the back.
Keith McFarland, Examiner.com. I have a question maybe for the group as a general. What was, for your respective areas, each important give you all had to give on, and a take that you all got respectively for your representation that made this agreement a go?
It's a very good question. There were a lot of gives and takes on, I can tell you, I think conceptually on our end, some of the things that we needed to do but were different for us. Mostly and one of the things I want to make a point that will answer your question, hopefully at the same time, is to make this business model work over time beyond the revenues and the different things contractually that are done. It's for us to have as many similarities as other franchise or other models, a bad word, but other structures, other league structures that are there that work properly. And that means that the collaboration that you get as an owner, the voice that you get as an owner on important matters, number one. It means the institutional knowledge that you need to be successful. We like to bring that barrier down over time. That's a big barrier to entry if you look at new ownership. To come in and be successful just with capital. Very hard to do. We'd like to, make some common things that change that around to the extent that we can in auto racing. So changing the whole structure for us was a huge, thing that we needed to do, but the whole concept of it for us.
I think when you step back and you look at the whole process, the area that probably got the most attention was how to find that right balancing act around governance. I think from the team perspective, the owners respect the fact that we need to have NASCAR as a sanctioning body to be enforcing the rules, but the teams also wanted a greater, more structured voice that Steve O'Donnell talked about. And getting to that place was difficult at times, and we really went through a lot of different iterations to figure out where is the right balance, how much influence should the teams have, how do we still maintain NASCAR with the right discretion to oversee the sport going forward. And so ultimately we landed on the concept of the team owner council, and then there's kind of a litany of different events that trigger when you have to have discussions about it. So I think that we're all comfortable where we landed, but that was probably one of the more difficult things just to work through as we went through the process.
I think one of the ones for me was having one-year agreements. There's maximum flexibility. I mean, so you can be nimble and responsive to what's happening year to year. The downside is you don't have stability. And so finding that right balance, the reason it took us this long to get to this period, is to really think through the intended and unintended consequences over the next 9 years and try to really memorialize this in the agreement. And so I think it pushed all of us to expand our thought process and to try to still be nimble, because we like the nimble aspect of our sport, but to build it into a much more structured agreement, which was an interesting trade-off.
And I would echo what Steve said on governance, probably just kind of the give and take dialogue, but I'd say more of what did you get? I mean, not to be sappy, but for me personally, sitting next to a guy like Tommy today, in a moment like this, I mean, here's a guy who's dedicated everything to the race business, and knowing that, we're in this, for a long term together, I think it's a big deal and what it's all about.
That's it. The list is so incredibly long. I think it would be hard to have memoirs or something for that. But suffice to say, you take the array of team owners and teams that we have involved with the sport right now, and the determination of those people, the success they have in their businesses, the competitive nature. Just to agree what time the race starts is sometimes a bit of a challenge. So I think everyone gave their pint of blood, so to speak, and like a lot of transactions I've been lucky to be participating in over time, is at the end of the day, a fair deal is where everyone compromised. No one's 100% happy, but everyone says, you know what, this is a fair balance and we can live with it, and I think we can kind of go forward with it, and that's what I think we struck here. So I think that from my standpoint, we got something that everyone can live with it. It's not perfect, but it's certainly a great step in the right direction, and I think everyone's happy to move forward now.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you all at Daytona International Speedway very, very soon. Thanks for joining us here this afternoon.
Thank you, guys.